Thanks everyone for letting me speak here. I've been here a few times to listen to other guys who have benefited from this group, and it's really good to, and also benefited from Mark coming down to Durban to speak. Mark Cole, one of the organisers, coming down to Durban to speak. So I'm really glad to be here. Just let me know if I'm blocking the screens. So the path to software development mastery is a long title. But I want to start with the concept of what mastery is, and then I'll talk about why this path, this idea is kind of better than the alternatives, and then how to get on the path. So what is mastery? That's what I'm going to start with. And I've got two metaphors to use, and then three lenses through how to understand it. So the first metaphor is a place you're all familiar with. Everyone been to Table Mountain? Been up Table Mountain? Well, the sort of general experience for those who go up Table Mountain is to drive up here, get in a cable car, take 5 minutes up the cable car and get to the top there by the summit, to the top right. And you get to experience the view. You enjoy your time up there, take some photos, Instagram, whatever. And from then you go back down and carry on your day. It's a common tourist thing to do in Cape Town. I went up about 5 times in my younger years. And it really didn't, Table Mountain didn't really mean that much to me. But a few years back, I went up with my brother. Instead of going up in the cable car, we went up this route, which is it's not a climbing route. You scramble up, and you're just hiking back and you go up. It takes about 4 hours. And the difference is just worlds apart. You get to experience the mountain every step of the way. Instead of just flying up in a cable car, you get to experience every step of the climb and experience every meter of that process. It was really in that experience, that process of being on the mountain for that time and experiencing every little crevice up the way and feeling the exposure as well, that I got to love Table Mountain. And I've since been up a few times on other routes, and it's equally as amazing. So what I want to kind of point out there is that this sort of experience of a mountain is not really about when people kind of go to the top of the mountain. But the top of the mountain is not the thing they're really experiencing. They're experiencing this climb up the mountain. In fact, someone really famous said this, right? Miley Cyrus, it's the climb. So she kind of captured it. I'll take someone a bit more respectable. Robert Greene states, he's got a book on mastery. It's like really, really fat. So I'm still working my way up to reading it. He says, in mastery there is no goal, no finish line, just a lifelong path of learning. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the experience of experiencing something like Table Mountain is not about getting to the end. It's not about getting to some goal or some ultimate place. It's about experiencing the path of learning. That's my first metaphor. The second one is this idea that it's elusive. There's no end to this journey, to this path. If you go along the path a bit further, your horizon expands out before you. It simply gets bigger. The world of exploration of what we can really learn gets more and more and more as we learn. So one of my hobbies or enjoyments is playing the piano. And I learned to play when I was quite young. And you might know a piece called Furries, which lots of young people learn. It's kind of annoying when you hear them playing it. It's great. But it's a piece by Beethoven that I heard a few years back.
How does it go?
How's it go? Yeah, so if you know the one. If you have kids who play the piano, you'll be sick of it. But I heard a master pianist, a 70-year-old Leon Fleischer, play it on CD a few years ago, and I understood that actually this piece could be incredibly beautiful. And I could play the piece my whole life and not reach that level of beauty that he can portray in that piece. You know, so even in a small microcosm of one small Beethoven piece, it's really a grade 4-ish piece, grade 5. He can produce something that's kind of this incredible experience. So another piano player said about something a bit broader about the piano sonatas of Beethoven. He said that one must spend a lifetime searching Beethoven's music without the expectation of reaching an absolute understanding. In fact, he's got this idea that he's got this vision of what each of the pieces sounds like in his head, and it's his life goal to get it out. And he's kind of always searching for that, to make it that much more of what Beethoven really got down in writing. One of yet another piano player says it like this: as you get near the horizon, your vision expands towards infinity. I mean, that was a master pianist, highly regarded, and the world was still opening up for him as he mastered his field. So mastery is a path, not a destination, and it's a lifelong journey of discovery. It's about the horizons ever expanding. So we'll look at a few lenses, get a bit more sort of practical, a few lenses to look at the path and kind of bring it down to a model, because all software developers, we enjoy models. Makes us understand things better, put them in kind of discrete steps. The first one is craftsmanship, and this is kind of talked about quite a bit in software circles. This is from the Renaissance or medieval era, where a craftsman would own a studio, he'd be a master, he'd apprentice some young kid who would then maybe do the work like this guy's doing, hammer some nails into the shoes. You kind of get used to the tasks that you do in a shoemaker shop. And after a number of years, the boy would progress, and he'd be kind of released because he couldn't do enough to work as a professional now. And he'd go travel the countryside in those days, from town to town, and learn what he could from other places and teach what he could to other places. And that was the journeyman phase. And at some point, the guild of shoemakers or blacksmiths would set them up as a master when they reached that level. That could kind of work in software development, not exactly the same, but the main thing is to understand that there's this phase called apprenticeship, which is really about learning as much as you can, and then finally moving on to journeyman. So I like to think that this is a phase of quite a number of years, where really our goal is to just absorb as much knowledge as we can and learn from as many great people as we can before we can start really being relied on to produce crafty software. The second model, or second lens, is the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. This is a more modern understanding, and it comes from a study of nursing by Richard Dreyfus. And in this model, in the popularized version of this model, there's 5 levels, essentially. And everyone starts out as a novice. And I'll use the example of driving a car. So when you're a novice, the phase you're in is where someone is giving you direct instructions and you're doing those direct instructions. So, and if you're driving a car, it's when you're going with your instructor or your parent who's teaching you exactly what to do at every step of the way. So put the clutch in, change the gear, every little thing. Once you get to the point where you can follow these rules exactly, like the K39, whatever those rules are that you have to learn to pass the driver's test, then you're at the stage of advanced beginner. Because you can apply the rules exactly. You can apply the recipe for driving. And that does work to get us past our driver's license. And after a number of years of applying those rules, we start understanding context. So we get a sense of what's around us. We get a sense of there's a car there, without having to follow those exact rules every single time. And that's the competence phase. From then on, most of us don't get anywhere past competent, I don't think, at driving, because that's the realm of race drivers, Formula One, proficient and expert. In software development, your experts are the guys who are experts in their field. For example, Linus Torvalds, he's pretty much the expert on Linux and on Git. By the way, he says both of those will be named after himself. So. the danger in this model, the danger in this model, what happens in this model, as you'll see, is ups and downs, and actually there's kind of plateaus. And you've got to watch out for not staying on the plateau forever and never moving forward. It's a very common thing that I've seen anyway when I've interviewed, is you get people that have 10 years experience maybe, but rarely have the same experience as someone in my company has 3 years experience, because their experience is kind of still following recipes and haven't learned the bigger context of the software development world. The third lens is the Shuhari lens, which is a martial arts idea. And there's 3 stages to this path: obey, digress, separate. And I'll give you an example. I think first I'll explain it quickly. Shu, the obey step is to follow what you're taught, to follow the rulebook. The ha is to break tradition, try variations, and then the re is to throw out the rulebook and transcend what you're being taught. So in martial arts, you'll find people creating new dojos, teaching new martial arts, because they've separated from their master that they learned from. The idea in software development is if you've done something like Scrum or XP, you often start by following the rulebook exactly. And then as you do retrospectives, you're kind of trying variations. And as your team matures along the way, you kind of forget about whether you're doing Scrum or well, what's a we've done. And Kent Beck, the father of XP, says a similar thing. He says, if you're going to take on XP, which is extreme programming, firstly, do everything as written. After that, experiment with the rules, variations. Finally, don't care if you're doing XP or not, because you've imbibed everything that you can learn from that new practice. Okay, so what is mastery? A never-ending journey, learning to love the path. You'll notice I haven't mentioned recognition, I haven't mentioned results. It's not about those things. It's about everyday learning. So why do this? Why not go for results? Why not go for status rather than learning to love the path? And for me, it's really about reframing my experience of software development or anything else to be one with more intrinsic reward. So this picture, well, let me explain quickly. Shifting from the notion that the destination is the victory point, to the sense that the journey itself, our daily journey, is the adventure, transforms our experience it can transform our experience from frustration to exhilaration. Not that things come easily, or that we might not always achieve things, but even if we don't achieve things we set out to achieve, we nevertheless have learned something or we've made something about that. So this picture reminds me of a story by G.K. Chesterton, who I love the saying of his, I remember it often. An inconvenience is only an adventure wrongly considered. So he in fact wrote this little story about one day his hat fell off and he chased after it. And the story of his day was really one of many inconveniences, but it read like an adventure. And because he was reframing this inconvenience, he enjoyed his day. He made something of it. And in fact, he made a great story out of it. So what I believe the sort of idea around mastery is to reframe our experiences to be one, to find with the learning where we can find it, to find what we can get out of each day instead of sort of living for some future goal. So the pursuit of mastery turns problems into challenges, inconveniences into adventures. But I mean, I may not create something, I work as a software developer, and I may not create something everyone uses. I might not do something like this that runs sports. But I can write some C# or JavaScript code today that's better than it was yesterday. Or I can improve my code base that I'm working on a little bit today. So I'm gaining some ground. I'm going along this path. And some quick examples. This guy is pretty famous. People don't normally recognize his photo. But he wrote The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which you see in the movies. Like pretty much everybody. I would expect it. If you haven't watched them, they're amazing. And even better, read the books, because they're even better. But J.R.R. Tolkien spent his whole life writing. He did it for the love of it. He wrote about this world called Middle-earth, and he just wrote for years and years and years. And at one point, he was writing stories for his children, and a publisher picked one up and thought this is a pretty good story. And they published it as The Hobbit, and it was really successful. And the publisher asked for a sequel. It took Tolkien 12 years to write the sequel, which is The Lord of the Rings. And actually it had been 30 years in the making, because he had been writing about that world for 30 years, just out of pure love for creating this world. So he's an example of what I would say was someone who was pursuing this, which is doing it for the love of what he was doing. And he got some success along the way. He didn't really in his lifetime achieve the success that the books have achieved since. But in fact, since he died in the 70s, his son, Christopher, has spent the last 40 odd years digging up all the stuff that Tolkien wrote and publishing books, more and more books. In fact, more books have been published after his death, about 5 or 6 have been published after his death, and they're equally brilliant. One writer said Tolkien's most well-known works, the ones that have obscured the rest, are actually a tiny corner of Tolkien's past. And if you've read any of the other stuff that he's written, you'd see that it's just one tiny little episode in this history. Someone else who recently inspired me about her story is this lady called Vivian Meyer, who spent her whole life taking photos. She took 150,000 photos. No one knew of her, no one had heard of her until she died. And some historians bought her storage box in Chicago and discovered these photos that are really beautiful. And they're in galleries now. They're worth a huge amount for the guys who are lucky finding them. And she was actually a nanny in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. And she spent her weekends taking photos of streets, people on the streets. Here's an example of one photo. But there's 150,000 in total. In fact, many of them hadn't been developed until after she died. She just enjoyed the process of taking the photo, not really the results or doing it. So those are kind of two people that inspire me in terms of they were motivated by the thing that they were doing every day, not by making some bestseller. So for me, the reason we pursue mastery is really to reframe our activities to be more meaningful to ourselves and to enjoy the work. Now, how do we do it? It's software development, so how do you begin? We're always beginning. Every day is a new beginning in this path as this horizon expands. Time? How much time do I have? Sorry, I'm in the chat.
10.
Cool. All right, so how do we pursue this? And there's lots of ways we can. So I've itemized a few that I've come across in the work I've done in training developers and watching them grow and seeing how they're motivated and seeing how we can pursue this. First thing to do, I think, is to employ a mindset that says that I can actually achieve something through hard work, through dedication. In a book called Mindset, you might have heard of it, Carol Dweck says, we like to think about champions and idols, people like Tolkien, people like Linus Torvalds, as idols and superheroes, as superheroes who were born different ways. We don't like to think of them as relatively ordinary people who made themselves extraordinary. Here's a guy who I think is a pretty good dev, Ken Beck. He's done a lot of good things. And he says about himself, I'm not a great programmer, I'm just a good programmer with great habits. Robert Greene, in another quote from his tome on mastery, says, mastery is not a function of genius or talent, it's a function of time and intense focus applied to a particular field. So a guy like Kent Beck, he invented JUnit with Eric Gamma, so the first unit testing framework that became all these other ones, NUnit, and then later, with every language just about has one of those XUnit frameworks. He rediscovered TDD. He's the co-creator of XP, Extreme Programming, and author of a number of books. And the way he thinks about it is he's just a good programmer with great habits. And what's interesting, one of his stories, he was at JavaCon in 2006 when they released JUnit 4. And he was standing up and presenting, I think this picture might have actually been there. But he said basically at that point, the only difference between me standing here and you sitting down there is I happened to be on the plane that day with Eric Gamma when we wrote JUnit. It might have been you sitting next to Eric Gamma writing JUnit. So his sort of idea is really just, it could have been anyone. The success kind of came almost by accident. So the first thing for me is to understand that actually any of us can achieve these. Maybe not all going to achieve the same level of success or level of mastery, I should say, not success. We all have certain capacities, we all have certain time constraints and different starting points. But all of us have the potential to grow. And Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, she says, there's two kinds of mindsets. One says, I have a fixed intelligence, I have fixed ability, and that's where I'm at. And the other says, I can grow, I can increase my intelligence, I can grow my abilities and talents. Kind of like what Brendan was talking about. You actually can grow your skills by day working. So that's kind of the first thing. And this goes along with adopting a beginner's mindset. It's to assent to the idea that you can learn. In fact, you can learn from any experience. And we run intentional practice and intentional learning every week. One is more geared towards theory, the other is geared towards doing things like parties. And what sometimes happens is senior developers, guys with 20 years experience or 18 years experience, like kind of don't want to do it. Like, this is silly. This is a string code. Like, I can solve much more stuff. But the idea of mastery is you can actually learn from anything. In fact, there's so much that I've learned. I don't know if who's done a code retreat? Yeah. So Game of Life, right? Are you guys sick of Game of Life? I'm sick of Game of Life. At one point, I was just super sick of Game of Life. I didn't want to go to code retreat. I was over Game of Life. And we had done it at code retreats, and I had done it at work for like 6 or 7 weeks solid, every intentional practice session. So I'd done it maybe 20, 30 times. And then the recent code retreat, I was humbled because we did some sort of constraint that said, now, tell, don't ask, or no, all methods return void or something. And I learned something really new, like that I had never thought about in Game of Life. There's so much that we can really learn about in these simple little problems. It's a tiny constrained problem. You can solve it in about 10 minutes, really, if you've done it lots of times. But it's still got so much benefit if you apply a beginner's mindset. So every time you go, sitting with a new pair, what am I going to learn from this person? What am I going to learn from this process? What process can we use to tease out some more understanding? So ask yourself, how can I reframe this to be a learning experience? Sometimes we've done, in our intentional learning, we've done something on like, something really basic. And we find that it's sometimes difficult for people that are experienced to even get value out of it. And yet there is value that can be found. Because some people do manage to find that value. So the mindset is, how can I reframe this to be a learning experience? For guys starting out as devs, people that are fairly new, assume apprenticeship. I talked about that model, journeyman master. Assume you're going to be an apprentice for a number of years, and what that means is working hard and learning for years before you really reap the benefits. At our company, that's a mindset we kind of hire for. And we want people with that mindset that they have this sort of idea that they will be great developers. They don't have to be earning huge amounts now. They do earn fine, but that's not the goal. That's not what they get hired for. They get hired so that one day they can be great developers, or at least they can always be on that path. So, for those who are really journeyman, seek out learning opportunities in everything. There's in everything that you do each day, you can find learning opportunities. And for those who are leading others, assume people have lots to teach you. Gandalf learned a lot from the hobbits. They were just like these, really small, insignificant people. And this wise wizard who lived thousands of years could learn a thing or two, including how to smoke pipe weed, and how to just have courage and strength that he actually didn't have himself. So the other thing that I thought of when adopting a beginner's mindset is to adopt the Shuhari model, where, say, like Brendan did when he started and with regards to the string carder, do it by the book, follow all the rules, and you will follow the rules. Because you've got to do it by the book. We're trying to apply that model. We kind of retroactively realize that we're trying to apply this model. But do it by the book for the first, until you can get it down to 20 minutes, and after that, just try variations. And then after that, stop following the rules. Just do whatever you like. Do it in whatever way you want. And we could do the same thing with TDD. When we adopted TDD many years ago, we followed Ken Beck's rules exactly for a while. And in fact, for many years we followed it exactly, and we still require new people to follow them exactly. But at this point, I'm experimenting with variations and starting to throw out starting to try different things. And one day I'll probably throw out the sort of rule that says I have to do TDD. Maybe I'll do it a different way. Secondly, set a course. So have an idea. This is about choosing a domain, choosing a language, choosing some area that you can push forward, because you can't go in 100 directions at once. And the idea would be to revisit this regularly, to find out if it's a valid course. We don't want to be going down a path that kind of everyone's going that way. We don't. Because part of the other thing you'll see later is to find like-minded people. If you're on your own, you're not going to be finding the people to collaborate with, to learn. So setting a course is important. This one, I think, is a big one. Brendan talked about it, so I don't need to go into detail. But do deliberate practice is one of the things we found that this is really helpful for, is growing skills in your daily work by applying more rigorously how you develop some small problem that isn't that important. It's throwaway code, you're going to delete it. But you do the practice so that when you do your work on a daily basis, you have those skills that you can build. We set aside time every week, but that's you might be able to do that yourself at home, or in the first 30 minutes of the day, or something like that. What we found, certainly with everyone doing string carder, is that everyone's able to discuss it and tease out really tiny little nuances of TDD. So it is helpful doing things together in the real practice. You get to bounce ideas with each other. Reflecting as you work. This one is built into some methodologies like Scrum and do retrospectives. Quite a few agile methodologies do retrospectives, and those just give you time to reflect, to stop and think. But we can do this in our daily work. We in fact, there's a couple ways. One is test-driven development. We do believe in it. We believe that it exists. So it does exist. But we also believe that it's helpful. And one of the reasons it's helpful is because it does allow us to reflect. That reflector step is the moment where I stop and reflect about the code that I just spewed out. Because they say just spew it out, but then stop and reflect and improve. So that gives you a moment to reflect while you're working. At Chilisoft, we try to build into our day actually cadence where there's a moment, there's a time where it's kind of time to stop what I'm doing and stop and reflect. We have focus sessions where for a couple of hours you're not going to be disturbed, and at the end of that you stop and reflect and kind of unwind. And actually we're trying to build something that, a little software product that helps you do that process. So it helps you reflect while you're working, so that you kind of inject the learnings as you go. The other one, which is kind of people have tried, and we find it really useful, is peer. It's not something to do all the time, but one of the things it does allow, with peer programming, what I mean is two people sitting at a computer. One of the things it does is one person stays deep in the code, like in the intricacies of the code, the classes, the methods, and the other person's thinking big picture, so they're reflecting about the whole design of the time. They're thinking, how is this affecting the design? And I found that to be really helpful in making me more kind of heightening our level of understanding, or our level of awareness of what we're doing. We're not just going down this process, just writing a whole bunch of code, creating something that we may not need. Someone kind of thinking about, is this actually something useful to be doing right now? So I found it very helpful. And after you've done it for a while, you kind of start worrying about when you're coding on your own, what am I doing? Like, is this the right thing? Because you're so used to having someone there just to kind of keep you on the right track. So that's reflecting. This one's fairly self-explanatory. We've been some good ones. I mean, there's so many out there. Brendan mentioned the clean coder, that's one. Clean code is another one that we. In fact, one thing we found is very few people do. In our company, we had, I would say maybe 10-20% of the guys. We're only a company of about 50, so that makes life pretty good at book. So we try to encourage people to read a book by giving a book to read and having sessions where different people present on different chapters. So they all have to at least read one chapter. And then we have discussions around it. And it was massively helpful reading through clean code together. The other one was the art of unit testing, because we do a lot of unit testing. So the art of unit testing by Roy Oshawa was another book we did. And then the clean coder about how to be a professional developer. There's loads of other books. For those of you who've read lots of books, or have read those, there's an endless supply. You know that. If you look on Amazon, it's always convincing me to buy a book. It's just the machine learning algorithm they've got is just incredible. It's like, learn how to tap into my wallet. Quite like-minded people. This one's big. So if you can find a company where this has this mindset that you can grow and you can be a great developer, that's awesome. Because they'll feed into that. But if you can't, then find a community. This is one of those communities. There's lots of communities into JavaScript. And Simon mentioned one just now. So find people on the same path as you. So they will encourage you and inspire you. They'll motivate you. Like Brendan said, everyone else at the company has done the string code in 20 minutes. That means I'm here. I'm going to stay here. That's what I have to do. And it's possible because everyone's done it. So they encourage you and they inspire you and they open your eyes to what you can do, new technologies, new ideas. In many of the books on being a professional developer, they talk about coaches and mentors. If you can find someone who can coach or mentor you, that's great. I've been fortunate to have some people in our company that have been incredible at just teaching and learning. So I'm heavily indebted to them. And I think, finally, don't stop at software development. Sort of idea of life being a path and about being new horizons to explore. It's not just about software development, it's one area. And there's a lot more out there. So I mean, that's it from me. I'm happy to take any questions on other ideas or any questions about the ideas that I have on how to see this. But yeah, otherwise, thanks. Questions? Yes.
What are your thoughts on when we're talking about setting the course? And as most software developers, when you see like the job spec, find that they want you to know all these 10 technologies that you play with them. So what are your thoughts on being a master of a lot of technologies that are probably related, or just mastering one technology? But obviously, you find that when you mastering one technology, company will say no, it's just one thing you know. That's not enough. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. For us, what's important is to be sort of have knowledge of a number of things and be an expert in something. And so we call that the T-shaped individual, where there's a broad knowledge. So if you're a developer and you don't know web at all, that's a hole in your knowledge. You need to understand something about the web, but not necessarily be an expert at web development because you focus on backend or whatever. But know something about it and then be an expert at something. And that's kind of what we like our developers to do. And we don't hire on specific skills, but on that broad knowledge, as well as proven expertise in some areas, because that proves that you've been able to focus on something and you're not just a complete generalist. So I would say make something your passion and go deep into that. Don't ignore everything else. Get some sort of, and that's why this sort of group is good. Or like something like Tech for Africa last week, you kind of get some new, just an idea of what's out there. But meanwhile, you're on your path to expertise in an area. But I mean, you've got to be careful as well what you're getting into. And what future does that have? You've got to be ready to jump to something else if that's going to be dying. And that's the nature of the work. I don't know if there's an answer.
Yeah.
No questions? Yeah.
So maybe a few thoughts on being good at learning. So we live in a world, in the industry, everything's changing, just like you mentioned now. So yeah, what are your thoughts on continuously learning, not just in terms of practicing technique, I mean more learning a new skill, learning a new framework, filling the holes, and not necessarily becoming an expert, but filling the holes in the team.
Right. So is the question about can you become really good at learning things?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's exactly about that.
Yeah. I mean that's essential. There's a great book by Dave Thomas on pragmatic thinking and learning, and they talk there about like understanding your brain and the way you learn, understanding learning models, and applying those, setting aside time to learn. And I think, if we deliberately practice learning, then we will grow the ability to learn faster.
There's a really good course on Coursera right now called Learning How to Learn. Cool. Super valuable.
We did a movie work on learning creative learning, which is a different type, but that was also very interesting. Learning how to learn. I signed up, but I wasn't right. I get the emails in the box, and they said if I manage to get to Coursera, sure. Computers are going to keep that, I think. It's essential that learning to learn is actually the main skill when you learn something.